Voyen looked on, aghast. With each new sphere that emerged on the back of the loader cruise, he felt his horror plunge deeper. As a trained apothecary, it was his duty to be knowledgeable in the patterns and pathologies of many types of biological warfare agents, and the Life Eater was known to him. He wished it was not. He flashed on a moment of memory, a day during his advanced training with the Magos Biologists, when the mentors had given live demonstrations on condemned criminals of the effects of various toxins upon unprotected flesh. He had seen the damage a single droplet of the voracious virus could do, watching it eat into a screaming heretic from behind impenetrable armor glass. Out there, in those globes, there were gallons of the thick green transmitter medium, every cupful swarming with countless trillions of the killer microbes. He estimated that the war shots aboard the Eisenstein alone would be enough to wipe out a large city. Commander Grulgor walked carefully among the loaders and his own men, showing no fear, directing the arming process personally. He was taking responsibility for it, Voyen realized, doing it himself to put his own stamp of perverse pride on the deed. He turned as soft footfalls across the maintenance gantry caught his attention. Garrow, his face like thunder, arrived with Sendek in tow and Caleb panting at the rear. The battle captain spoke without preamble. "Is it true?" "It is," Voyen pointed. "Look there. The sigil on the spheres is unmistakable. It is the Rotbane, Lord, a weapon even the Emperor is loath to use." He shook his head. "Why has Grulgor done this? What madness has possessed him?" Garrow's eyes were hard and flinty. "It is not madness, brother. It is treason." "No," insisted Voyen, desperately trying to rationalize the situation, as he had been since he sent Caleb running. "Perhaps if I spoke to Grulgor, I could discern the truth. I could approach him as a lodge brother. He would listen." The captain shook his head. "He will not. Mark me, this will end only one way." Garrow stood up, coming out of the shadows of the gantry, and walked slowly and deliberately down the ramp to the main level of the loading bay. He ducked beneath the hanging lip of a blast hatch and called out, "Ignatius Grulgor, come here and explain yourself." The captain's voice boomed off the tall, wide corridor above the gun carriages. Voyen and the others followed warily, and the apothecary saw Grulgor's expression stiffen at the new arrivals. "Garrow," he sneered, "it would be best for you to take your men, turn about and leave. What occurs here is not of your concern." All around him, the work-gangers and the Astartes from the second company became still. Garrow's hand was on the hilt of Libertas. "That will not happen." Grulgor nodded, a smile of amusement on his lips. It was clear he had expected no less. "Answer me," commanded Garrow. "In the Emperor's name, you will answer me." The commander's face twisted in a grimace. "The Emperor," he said in a mocking tone. "Where is he now? What coin does his name carry in this moment?" "Blasphemer," spat Caleb beneath his breath. "Why should we answer to him?" Grulgor snarled. "He abandoned us. When we needed him the most, he cut away, left us behind out here and fled back to your precious Terra. What has he done since that day, eh?" The commander spread his hands, taking in his men. "He has sold off our birthright to a council of fools and politicians, taken civilians who have never known hardships or the kiss of war, and made them lords and lawmakers in our stead. The Emperor, he has no authority over us." Voyen blinked back his surprise at such a raw, seditious pronouncement, and gasped when he heard a chorus of angry assent among the men of the second. "Only the War Master and the Death Lord can command us," Grulgor continued. "What we do here We do by the will of Horus and Mortarion." Garrow advanced menacingly, and with his thumb he flicked the hilt of Libertas so that a length of the blade emerged from its scabbard. "You and your men will stand down and quit this insanity." Grulgor chuckled. "You are 3 Astartes and a housecarl. I have my entire command squad and a handful of naval crew. The odds do not favor you." "I have right on my side," Garrow said, "and this will be the last time I ask you." The commander studied the battle captain. "Very well, then. Go ahead." He tipped back his head and showed his bare throat. "Kill me, if you will." When Garrow wavered, Grulgor's rough laugh cut through the tense air. "You can't. I can see it in your eyes. The thought that you might have to take the life of another Astartes, it horrifies you." He looked away. "You're as crippled in spirit as you are in the flesh. That is why you failed to see, Garrow. Beneath that rigid exterior, you are weak. You are too afraid to do what must be done." Garrow's mailed fingers were clasped around the sword's hilt, but it seemed cemented in the scabbard, unwilling to be drawn. Curse Grulgor, but Garrow knew that on some level the braggart was right. For a brief instant, the words of the Yorgal Psyker were there in his mind again, pressing at his will. "Death Guard, so confident in your rightness, so afraid to see the crack in your spirit." He gasped, and Grulgor saw the hesitation. Suddenly the commander was tearing the stubby frame of a bolt pistol from his belt and shouting. Garrow saw it coming up, and Libertas leapt into his hand, the metal flashing. Time skipped, and there was gunfire in the chamber, shouts and the crashing of metal on metal. "Check your fire!" Grulgor bellowed, drawing a battle knife with his free hand. Garrow was aware of Voyen and Sendek slipping away into battle stances, and he saw Caleb duck out of the line of fire. He thought of Decius up on the bridge where he had left him. The youth's close combat skills would have been a useful asset had he been here. Grulgor had not lied. The odds were indeed stacked against them, but the clutter of machinery and equipment across the gunnery decks and the presence of the volatile warhead globes made it awkward for his men to move in and engage. On a level battlefield, the fight would already have been over. Not here. Garrow surged forward and advanced at the commander, but 2 of his men blocked his path, each armed with heavy combat hammers. He moved swiftly, parrying a blow from the left with the sword and striking out to the right with a punch that staggered the second opponent. Garrow spun in place and used Libertas to cleave the haft of one hammer and send the owner falling backward with a sword gouge down the torso of his armour. Following through, Garrow struck the second man again, this time with the heavy pommel of the blade. The Astartes dropped, his face a red ruin of smashed bones. This was not the first time Nathaniel had shed the blood of his battle brothers in combat. On many occasions he had fought to a standstill against live opponents in the practice cages. But those incidents were always under controlled circumstances, and never with fatal intent. Inwardly, he cursed Grulgor for forcing him into this situation. Off to the edges of his sight, he saw Voyen and Sendek had their own battles to fight. Garrow sensed another aggressor coming to his rear, and shifted just as a fractal-edged steel knife blade scraped at his shoulder. Reacting without conscious thought, the battle captain reversed his grip on Libertas and thrust it backwards under his armpit. The sword ran through his attacker, and he turned to draw it back out. Garrow's heart tightened in his chest as he watched his kill fall away to the deck plates with a crash. A death guard was dead, and it was by his hand. The scrum of crewmen swarmed over Caleb, kicking and punching him to the floor. Not one of them had the courage or stupidity to take on an Astartes, and so en masse they had sought the next best target. The housecarl railed at them for taking Grulgor's side over Garrow's, but he wasted his breath. The swabs saw only which captain had the greater numbers and gave their loyalty to him. Caleb fought as well as he could, but it was wild and mad, clothes and skin tearing, hair ripping away. He felt sharp-nailed fingers rend his tunic and snatch at his neck. His collar pulled tight against him, and he felt a surge of anger. Caleb head-butted his attacker and swore, finding new rage to fuel him. "Emperor, curse you, filthy horsens!" A blocky metal shape rose up before him and clubbed his temple. Caleb shook off the blow and grabbed at it. He smelt the odour of gun oil. It was a stub pistol. The housecarl shoved against the men trying to hold him and snatched at the small weapon. It went off with a spitting crack of sound, and someone screamed. Caleb rolled free of the mob and came up still gripping the hot metal ingot. His fingers easily found the trigger and grip, and he blasted the next man to come at him through the eye. The gun was his salvation, a gift from his divinity. "The God Emperor protects," he snarled. "I am his servant and his subject." He staggered away, breathing hard. Caleb blinked and saw a figure before him in the marble white and green trim of a Death Guard captain. The Astartes was aiming a bolt pistol into the melee with great care. Instinctively, the housecarl looked to see who the target was. Garrow was oblivious to the imminent kill shot, grimly fighting hand-to-hand with another warrior. "No, he cannot die." The thought burned like fire across the serf's mind. "I will not permit it. The God Emperor has chosen him." Caleb raised the tiny gun and spoke a prayer aloud. "Divine One, guide my hand." He fired. The shot was released an instant before Grolgor's finger tightened on his trigger. The stub bullet from the handgun was of such small gauge that all it did was nick the metal of the bolt pistol where it struck the frame. But even that was enough to deflect the commander's aim. The bolt shell from Grolgor's pistol went wide, keening off a girder near Garrow's head and arcing away in a ricochet. Grolgor reacted with preternatural speed and turned, throwing his battle knife at the housecarl. The Astartes blade buried itself in Caleb's chest, the impact throwing him down to collide with one of the gunnery bay's control lecterns. It all happened in an instant, barely a second from the report of the stub gun. Blood filled Caleb's mouth, his throat and his lungs as a new sound crossed the room. A brittle, fierce noise, eggs breaking, ice cracking, glass shattering. Through his fogged vision, Caleb saw a thin line of dark haze issuing from one of the warhead spheres, hissing with virulent potency. "The globe!" shouted Voyen, kicking away from the thick of the fight. Grolgor's deflected bolt round struck a glancing hit, webbing the frangible glass ball with a spreading fan of fractures. "Get away!" He yanked at Sendek's arm, pulling him backward. Black gas was forming into a slow, malevolent haze, buzzing like a swarm of gnats. Work-gangers close to the mist were already vomiting and clawing at their exposed skin. In moments, it would fill the width of the gunnery chamber. Garrow's line of sight swept the room, and he found Caleb staring fixedly at him, pink froth leaking from his lips. "Lord!" he cried, blood bubbling in his throat. "You are of purpose! The God Emperor wills it!" The housecarl lurched up onto the control lectern, wheezing. "His hand lies upon all of us. The Emperor protects." Garrow reached out a hand in a warding gesture as Caleb threw himself forward, using the last of his strength to press down on an emergency release switch. Sirens blared, and in the steel ceiling overhead, huge cogwheels disengaged, letting walls of thick iron drop down towards seal wells in the deck. Garrow flung himself under the falling blade of metal, landing hard and rolling out to where Voyen and Sendek were crouched in the next compartment. One of Grolgor's men, the warrior named Mokir, threw himself after Garrow, clutching at his heels. Mokir landed short, with only his upper body across the well. The iron wall slammed shut across him, the massive guillotine severing the body of the Astartes with a sickening crunch of bone and ceramite. Garrow's heart hammered against the inside of his ribcage, matching the pounding of fists from the inside of the thick gate. A phantom ache hummed through his augmetic leg. "Blast shields," gasped Sendek. He swallowed hard. Voyen nodded. "He saved our lives. The hatch is proof against the bane. The little man gave himself up to save us and the ship." The banging on the metal doors grew softer and softer, until finally it ceased altogether. Garrow got to his feet and crossed to the shield, placing his palm against it. It felt blood-warm, probably from the virulent chemical reactions of the rot taking place inside. He tried to block out thoughts of the carnage contained in there, the bodies bursting with liquefied organs and organic decay. He tried, and he failed. Caleb's words echoed in his mind. It was clear now that the voice that had spoken to him of the Emperor and divinity through the fog of his healing coma must have been Caleb's. And now the loyal servant had given his life in trade for his master's.
"I am of purpose," Garrow mumbled. "What purpose?"
"Sir?" Sendek came to him, calling out to be heard over the hooting roar of the klaxons. "What did you say?" He turned away from the shield. "Purge that compartment. Tell Karaya to vent the air in there to space. The Life-Eater reaction will spread to every one of the container spheres and release the entire warload. But it can't exist without an atmosphere. I want it off this ship." Voyen nodded. "And the bodies in there, Captain? They will be decaying and—" "Leave them," he snapped, fighting off the dark mood settling upon him. "We must move swiftly, unless we wish to join them in death." Garrow frowned and slammed Libertas back into its sheath. "The die has been cast." Like the Endurance, the Eisenstein had her own observatorium on the dorsal hull, situated just forward of the frigate's command tower. It was nowhere near as large, however, and with the broad and tall figures of several Astartes crammed into it, the open chamber seemed smaller still. Decius's face set in a grimace as the hatch opened, and another 2 Death Guard entered. The apothecary, Voyen, stepped into the chamber with Sendek at his side, and the expression upon both of their faces was enough to give him pause. Decius looked across to where Sergeant Haker was standing with men from his squad, and he saw that old Anders shared the black disposition of the new arrivals.
"Merrick, what is going on?" demanded the veteran. "I'm suddenly ordered to drop everything and come up here. Tell no one. And I hear distant sirens and snatches of scuttlebutt from the swabs about gunfire and explosions." "There were no explosions," said Sendek grimly.
"Where is the captain?" asked Decius. "He'll be here in a moment," Voyen replied. "He's gone to fetch some others." Decius wasn't content with another evasive answer. "When I was on the bridge, there was a fire alert from the gunnery decks. An entire compartment amidships was sealed off. That's 4 weapon carriages disabled, according to the control servitor. Then I hear you on the Vox shouting for an emergency decompression down there." He pointed at the apothecary. "First the lodges, then Tarvitz, and now this. I want an explanation." "The captain will give it to you," the other man retorted.
"Saul Tarvitz?"
Haker broke in.
"What about him? The last I heard, he was on the Andronius."
"By now, he'll be in the Coral City if he didn't burn up on the way down," Sendek said grimly. "He broke protocol, stole a Thunderhawk and made for the surface of Istvan III. Lord Commander Eidolon ordered that he was to be shot down." Haker's disbelief was palpable.
"That's ludicrous. You must be mistaken."
Decius shook his head. "We were all there. We heard the order, but Garrow disobeyed it. He let Tarvitz escape." The younger Astartes were still smarting over what had taken place, his loyalties pulling him in different directions over his commander's actions. "It is sedition."
"Yes, it is."
Garrow's voice issued from the hatch as he entered, with Shipmaster Karaya and the deck officer Vort following behind. The woman closed the seal behind them at Garrow's nod, and it was only then that Decius noticed the housecarl wasn't with them. The battle captain moved into the centre of the room and placed a folded cloth packet on the observatorium's control dais. He took in all of them with a heavy, calculating stare. Decius had the impression that Garrow was reticent to move on, to say the words that were pressing at his lips. Eventually he sighed and nodded to himself, as if he had made a choice.
"When we leave this room, we will be rebels," he began. "The guns of our brothers will be turned against us. I will call upon you to do questionable things, but there is no other path now. There is no choice. We alone may be the only souls capable of carrying the warning."
"What warning is this, Lord?" one of Haker's men asked, scowling deeply. Garrow looked at Decius.
"A warning of sedition."
Carrier cleared his throat. Unlike his second-in-command, the shipmaster did not seem ill at ease, being outnumbered by so many Death Guard in so close a proximity.
"Honored Battle Captain, with all due respect, this is my ship, and I will have you explain what has gone on aboard her before we go any further." "Indeed, as is right," nodded Garrow.
He looked down at his mailed hands and took a deep breath. In a solemn, metered voice, Decius's mentor relayed the events of his confrontation with Grolgor. Shock took hold as he spoke of the virus bombs, turning into a grim, loaded silence as Garrow went on to convey the commander's declaration against the Emperor and the horrifying result of the melee on the gunnery decks. Decius felt his head swim with the import of these things. It was as if the floor was turning to mud beneath his boots, dragging him down into disarray and confusion. Vought was pale as paper.
"The Life Eater. It will not spread."
Sendek shook his head.
"It was contained in time. The viral strain burns out very quickly." "I would recommend the compartment not be opened for the next 6 hours," added Voyen, "to be certain. The war load will have dissipated harmlessly into space after the atmosphere vents were opened, but dormant clades might linger in the bodies of the dead." "Our own men?"
Haker shook his head.
"I can barely believe it. I knew Grolgor was a braggart and a glory-seeker, but this... Why would he do something so outrageous?"
The veteran looked to Garrow, an almost naive imploring in his eyes.
"My lord?"
Garrow wanted to explain Grolgor's actions away. Like Voyen, some secret part of him had hoped that perhaps this was all some strange dream, or a temporary madness that had taken hold of his rival. But the moment he had looked Ignatius in the eye, he had known it was not so. Grolgor would never ally himself to a cause if he thought it might have a risk of failure. The certainty, the complete assurance on the other Death Guard's face, that sealed the truth of it for Garrow. Grolgor was the proof of Tarvitz' warning, the damning reality snapping hard into place like a magazine into the breech of a bolter. All the small things, the little asides and the moments of doubt, the dark feeling of ominous import, the mood aboard Endurance and the vengeful spirit, every element that had troubled Nathaniel these past days turned in place and became a part of the same whole.
"Saul Tarvitz, my honor brother and friend, brought me a forewarning. In risk to his own life, he fled the ships of the Emperor's children to the planet below, in order to tell our kinsmen down there that a viral attack is imminent. For this, Eidolon attempted to have him killed before he could succeed."
Garrow nodded again.
"I chose not to follow that command. As a result, Saul is on Istvan III as we speak, doubtless rallying men of the Legiones Astartes to find cover before the attack begins. My faith in what he told me is ironclad, as strong to me as my bond is to you."
He extended a hand and tapped Haker on the shoulder, then began to walk around the room. Garrow met the gaze of each person there as he did so, impressing his own truth upon them.
"Here is the horrific truth. Grolgor and Eidolon are not two errant souls pursuing some personal agenda, but soldiers in a war of betrayal that is about to unfold. What they have done is not of their own volition, but under the orders of the War Master himself."
He ignored the scattering of gasps that the statement brought forth.
"Horus, With the support of Angron, Fulgrim, and, though it sickens me to say it, our master, Mortarion, has done this.
Across the chamber, Kariah almost collapsed into an observation chair. He was struggling to make sense of Garrow's words. Vought stood beside him, her face twisted as if she were ready to be physically ill.
Why?
Asked the shipmaster.
Terror take me if I can see the logic and truth in all this. But why would he do it? What would Horus have to gain by turning against the Emperor?
Everything, muttered Decius. Voyan's head bobbed in a rueful nod. There has been talk of the War Master at second and third hand in the lodges. Talk of how far away the Emperor is, and of discontent over the commands of the Council of Terror. The tone of things has been strained ever since Horus was injured at Davin, after he returned from his healing.
The very tip of treason's blade, glimpsed in hidden places, said Sendek.
Garrow pressed on.
Horus personally chose all the units for the assault on the Coral City. He picked only the men he knew would not turn if he called them to his banner. The bombing will rid him of the only obstacle to open insurrection.
If this is so, demanded Decius, then why are we not down there as well? Your staunch loyalty to the Emperor and Terror is hardly a secret, sir. Garrow gave a cold smile and tapped on the thigh plate of his armour.
If the war singer on Istvan Extremis had not forced this piece of pig iron on me, I have no doubt we would be alongside Temeter and his troops, unaware that a sword is poised at our necks. But the turn of events has played in our favour, and we must seize our opportunity.
Tarvis's escape will not remain undiscovered forever, said Vought. When the War Master learns of what you did, Eisenstein will be under the guns of the entire fleet.
I have no doubt of that, Garrow agreed. We have a few hours at most.
What do you propose? Asked Sendek. This frigate is only one ship. We cannot hope to assist the ground forces by intercepting the bombardments or attempting to engage the War Master. Garrow shook his head.
If Saul succeeds, we'll have no need to stop the bombing. If not,
he swallowed hard.
There is nothing we can do to help those men.
Decius saw it first.
You plan to flee?
What's your tone?
Snapped Haker. Decius ignored the veteran. You want us to run?
We have no choice. If we remain, we will perish. But if we can get this ship out of the system, there is a chance we can still stem the tide of this treachery. We must finish the mission that Saul Tarvitz began. We must carry the warning of this perfidy to Terror and the Emperor.
He looked at the dark-skinned man.
Master Kariah, can the Eisenstein make space for the Sol system, or, at the very least, a star close to the Imperial core?
He shook his head slowly.
On any other day, I would say it could, but today I cannot be certain.
The warp has become increasingly clouded in recent weeks, full of storms and turbulence,
Vought broke in.
Interstellar travel has become very difficult. If we attempted to translate now, our navigators would be virtually sightless.
But you could still make the jump,
Haker noted.
We could still get away, even if we went into the warp blind.
Kariah snorted.
The ship would be cast to the etheric currents. We could find ourselves light years off the charts anywhere. Anywhere but here, said Garrow with finality. I want preparations made. Barrick, Russell.
He fixed them with a hard eye, using their given names for the first time.
Will you resist me on this?
The two naval officers exchanged glances, and he saw that they were with him.
No, said the shipmaster. Many of my men are faithful Terrans, and they won't falter. But there are some who will balk. I imagine I have men who follow Horus among my crew.
There's also the matter of Grolgor's other Astartes on board, added Sendek. They will be asking questions very soon. Garrow looked to Haker.
Haker, take what you need and secure the ship. Apply whatever force is required. Understood?
There was a moment of silence as the reality of Garrow's command became clear. Then the veteran saluted.
Aye, Lord.
Garrow bent over the control dais and unwrapped the cloth bundle he had brought with him. In it were a dozen thin slips of paper, dense with writing in a quick, forceful hand. The battle captain handed one to everybody in the observatorium, including Kariah and Vought. The woman frowned at the piece of parchment.
What is this?
An oath of moment, said Decius. We will swear our duty upon it.
Garrow opened his mouth to speak, but the clang of the hatch stilled his tongue. The communications officer blundered headlong into the observatorium and skidded to a halt, mouth agape at the clandestine meeting he'd interrupted.
"Mass!"
bellowed Kariah.
"For terror's sake, man, knock before you enter."
Your pardon, sir,
puffed the box operator.
but this priority signal came in for Commander Grulgor's eyes only. He doesn't answer.
Kariah snatched a data slate from him and paled as he scanned it. He read aloud.
"It's from Typhon on the Terminus Est. Message reads, weapons free. Bombardment to commence imminently. Permission granted to terminate any and all impediments to operation."
All eyes turned to Garrow. The subtext of the message was clear. Typhon was handing Grulgor the authority to kill Garrow and his men. He held up the paper.
"The oath, then,"
he rumbled, pausing to take a breath.
"Do you accept your role in this? Will you dedicate yourself to the safe carriage of the warning to Terra, no matter what forces are ranged against us? Do you pledge to do honor to the 14th Legion and the Emperor?"
The captain drew Libertas and held the sword point down. Haker was the first to place his hand upon the blade.
"By this matter and this weapon I so swear."
One by one the Astartes followed suit, with Decius the last. Then Kariah and Vought gave the vow as well, as Mas looked on wide-eyed. As they filed from the chamber, Decius caught his commander's arm.
"Fine words," he said. "But who was there to act as witness to them?"
Garrow pointed out at the stars.
"The Emperor."
Chapter 9. He was alone in the barracks compartment. Haker and the others were out about the ship, executing his orders to take Eisenstein under their complete control. Distantly, Garrow thought he heard the faint echoes of bolter reports, and his lips thinned. There was only a handful of Grulgor's men still at large on board the frigate. Like his 7th Company, the majority of the late commander's 2nd was scattered elsewhere about the fleet, with only a few squads here to oppose Garrow's plans. Kariah's willing agreement to take the oath of moment had cemented his trust in the shipmaster, and through him he had control of the bridge officers. He had no doubt there would be malcontents among the naval ratings, but they would quickly fall into line when the Astartes gave them orders, and if they refused, they would not live for long. By rights, he should have been out there doing the job of securing the ship himself, but the thundering churn of emotion inside him was making it hard for Garrow to concentrate. He needed a moment with his own counsel, to centre himself in the face of the events that had been set in motion. Over and over he thought of the men he had fought alongside in the hosts of the Death Guard, and wondered how and why they could turn their faces from the Emperor. For the most part, his brothers were good and honourable men, and Garrow thought he knew the colour of their hearts. But now he doubted that certainty. The awful realization of it was not that his kinsmen were ready to shake off the Emperor's commands and embrace treachery, but that most of them were merely weapons. They would not pause when orders came to them, even if those orders were beyond their comprehension. It was the lot of an Astartes simply to do, not to question, and he felt damned by the understanding that Horus would play that unswerving allegiance to his bitter ends. He had considered briefly the idea of opening up all of Eisenstein's Vox transmitters to maximum power and broadcasting the truth of the treachery across the entire 63rd Fleet. There were noble men out there, he was sure of it. Warriors like Loken and Torgadon in the War Master's own legion, and Varan of the World Eaters. If only he could contact them, save their lives. But to do so would have meant suicide for everyone on the frigate. Every minute they kept their silence was a minute more for Garrow to plan an escape with the warning. Kinsmen like Loken and the others would have to find their own path through this nightmare. The message was far more important than the lives of a handful of Astartes. Garrow only hoped that once his mission had been fulfilled, he might see them again, either back on Terra at the end of their own escape, or here once more with the reprisal fleet at his back. For now, those men were on their own, as were Garrow and his warriors. The battle captain crossed to the arming alcove that Caleb had set aside for him, seeing the eagle cuirass mounted there on a stand. It was polished and perfect, as if the armor had come from a museum and not been battered in combat less than a week ago. He laid a hand on the cool ceramite and allowed himself to feel his full regret at the housecarl's death.
"You died well, Caleb Arryn," he told the heir. "You did honor to the Death Guard and to the Seventh."
Garrow wished that he could promise the man's memory some form of tribute. He wanted to place the serf's name upon the wall of memory on Barbarous, give him the credit as if he had been a full-fledged battle brother. But that would not happen. Not now. Garrow doubted that he would ever see the dank skies of the Death Guard's homeworld again, not after the events at Istvan. Caleb's spirit would have to be content with the esteem of his master. Garrow's lip curled.
"Here I am, thinking of spirits, talking to myself in an empty room."
He shook his head.
"What is happening to me?"
Next to the cuirass, a bolter lay upon a folded green cloth, and, like the armor, it too was pristine and unblemished, fresh from the Legion artificers. Garrow took off a gauntlet and ran his fingers over the slab-sided breech. The weapon was deep with etchings in high Gothic script, combat honours and battle records listed along the length of it. There were names imprinted here and there, lined in dark emerald ink, each the name of a battle brother who had carried the gun into war and perished with it on them. Garrow's weapon had been lost to him on Istvan Extremis, destroyed by the brutal sonic attack of the war-singer. Nothing but shattered brittle metal had been left. This bolter, then, was to be his new sidearm, and it was with bittersweet pride he took it up and held it to parade ready. A new name glittered on the frame. Pyre Ral.
"Thank you, brother," whispered Garrow. "I will take a dozen foes with it in your name."
As was the way of the Astartes, Ral's war gear was salvaged, and what could remain in use to the 14th Legion did so. In this manner the Astartes kept the memories of their dead kinsmen alive long after they had perished. Garrow's eyes fell to find a carry-sack made of roughly woven fabric lying forgotten in the corner of the alcove. He dropped into a crouch and took it up. Caleb's belongings. He sighed. When an Astartes died, there was always a brother ready to gather up the meagre possessions he might have left behind and see to them. But there were no provisions for a simple housecarl. Garrow felt an unfamiliar kind of sorrow over Caleb's passing. It wasn't the hard fury he had for the death of Ral or the hundreds of others he had witnessed. Only now that Caleb was gone did Garrow understand how much he had valued the little man, as a sounding board, as a servant, as a comrade. For a moment the captain considered ditching the sack in the nearest ejector chute and making an end of it, but that would have been ignoble. Instead, with a gentleness belied by his large, heavy hands, Garrow traced through Caleb's effects. Utility blades and armory tools, some changes of clothing, a trinket made from a bolter shell. He turned the object between his fingers and held it up to the lamplight. A matrix etching of the Emperor stared back at him, beneficent and all-knowing. He pocketed the icon in a belt pouch.